This is episode 32 of the Discipleship Directives with Dr. Dan and Crawford. He is the founder and president of discipleallnations.org. My name is Vidal, and I'm your host, Dr. Crawford. Also, he is a professor emeritus for evangelism and discipleship for the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. It is a wonderful day, Dr. Crawford. It's good to have you on your podcast. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling wonderful. It's a great day in the neighborhood.
Well, that's good. No, it's good to have that information on a day like this because we do have a special friend of yours. And just before we click record, I got to connect with him and his beautiful wife. But Dr. Crawford, I'd love for you to introduce our guest this morning.
I'd be glad to. I've been looking forward to today because our special guest is Larry Davis. And Larry has most recently retired as pastor of South Garland Baptist Church in Garland, Texas. But we go way back before that to my early days as the campus minister at Pan American University. It was probably even Pan American College then. And Larry was a student there and was involved in our ministry. And he is from Edinburgh. And he and Marilyn have been friends for a long, long time. So I'm glad to welcome him to the podcast this morning.
Larry, welcome this morning. How are you doing, brother?
I am doing fine. Thank you. Very good to be with you both.
Well, Larry, we were always excited to talk about ministry and to talk about discipleship and spiritual formation. And knowing that you are a pastor, have been a pastor for many years, that also nurtures the excitement. But before we get into the pastoral conversation, just on a brief note, give us just a quick update. What's taking place in your life? How's family doing?
Well, family's doing well. We have retired. It's been 6 years now, six years last month. And so I've been doing supply work, interim work, and still very active in the church where Marilyn and I was served as pastor.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, brother, for your services. Thank you for everything that you guys have done. We'll get into the conversation in just a second. But again, before we get into what's taking place today and where the Lord has taken you lately, I love to ask you a question because, you probably know this because I know you keep up with Dr. Crawford and what's taking place in his life and ministry, because I know you guys have been close friends for a long time, which reminds me that you both go back to BSU, Baptist Student Union, now it's called Baptist Student Ministry, years back into Pan American College, if I'm not mistaken. And
that is correct.
You were a student back then where Dr. Crawford used to be your director. So the question that I got for you this morning is anything that you remember, anything that probably became either memorable or some sort of a impact that made in your life when it comes to the ministry, the teaching, the mentoring of Dr. Crawford in your life or ministry from there?
Surely. I am honored to share. I was a sophomore student at Pan American when Dan and Mrs. Crawford came to Edinburgh. And Dan, I believe you also taught a New Testament class that first year you were there. I think it was the Book of Acts. But I was involved in the Baptist Student Union, and Dan was our director. Just amazing openness on his part to me. I was selected as missions chairman. And one of the things, Dan, we haven't talked about in a long, long time, but I remember as missions chairman going out to San Manuel on Sunday afternoons. We had other mission points. Dan, much more than the previous year, we were more involved in some mission points around. But I couldn't find others to go to San Manuel, and so I went myself. And there were two older gentlemen that met in somebody's church there. And I did not speak Spanish well, but I could read the New Testament in Spanish. And I read the New Testament to those two gentlemen on Sunday afternoons. And that was just a very special part. I still pass San Manuel there on 281 when we go back to visit Edinburgh. And I think of that. I think of that Bible class. I think of things we did fellowship-wise, a tremendous group of students. And Dr. Crawford was just, he was available. Vidal, I think one of the things that stands out for me was he was present. He was there. And, we thought that South Texas was kind of the other side of the world. And to think that he and Joanne would come to the Valley, I think there was some of that thought there. We were just glad, very, very glad to have them with us in South Texas.
When you say missions chairman, you were missions chairman of the BSU or your church?
Yeah. No, it was the Baptist Student Union. We had a council and different positions on that council, and missions chair was a part of that council.
Dr. Crawford, any comments on what you just heard? I mean, I know he's taking you back to those early years of ministry. What do you remember of those experiences?
I'm just glad he remembers that, because I don't remember that. I remember him being missions chairman. I didn't remember. I do now remember about him going out there on Sunday afternoons, and that was his early preaching experience. Even though he could only read the Bible to him, he couldn't.
That's right.
But, that's good. It's a good remembrance. I had forgotten that part of it.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll mention briefly, make this comment just for the sake of our conversation, and also to remind everyone that when it comes to the BSU or BSM, Baptist Student Ministry, a ministry of Texas Baptist, BGCT, throughout the years, because I'm speaking as part of someone who was a beneficiary during my college years from that ministry, we were able to do church plant back then in East Texas. And then my kids now, they've been, the BSM obviously produces that mentorship that you're describing right now, Larry, but also provides the venues for students to get on the field and actually serve and do ministry. And my assumption will be, which I don't know your story, specifics of the story, that a lot of this, calling into vocational ministry came from those early years of serving and seeing God at work. And at least that was my experience, a lot of the confirmation that God was calling us to do a specific, service into the kingdom of God. So Larry, I found out also, which is also exciting for me, that you and Marilyn, your wife, met back at those years. And part of the excitement for me is that I met your wife on my way into Texas Baptist in 2021 as she was exiting the BGCT after, 40 years of service?
Yes, she retired after 42 years with the Christian Life Commission.
Mercy. Wow. Well, I'm just privileged and to know those facts. But take us back into both of you guys meeting at Pan American back in your college years.
Well, we were a part of the BSU, as you said, and it was what was called Bronco days because they're the Pan American Broncs. We were, and there was Dr. Crawford led us into having a float in the Bronco Days parade. And so Marilyn showed up with my best friend in high school, a year ahead of me. And so they had a date to come by and work on the float for Bronco Days that our BSU was sponsoring. They did not stay very long. They left. I was left with working on the float, but I did that and did my job there. But she was a part of the Baptist Student Union. I was, and we met there in those Bible studies. We went together to what they call leadership training. It was LTC, and then, the state convention in Dallas. And so we got to know each other through the Baptist Student Union. So it was a good experience.
Well, no wonder after all these years, you guys have been able to continue that legacy of serving Jesus through the local church and everything that you guys have done. Larry, I'm assuming that you keep up and you have seen the trajectory for Dr. Crawford, that he has been in South Texas, back in South Texas for the last, I don't know, maybe 8-9 months now, coming close to a year, serving the pastors through Valley Baptist Mission Education Center and doing a monthly conference for pastors and church leaders. Have you seen anything that he has learned lately from Dr. Crawford on his ministry?
I would think probably, not as much as this most recent stay. What the most recent teaching these months with the pastors in the Rio Grande Valley just says to me, that's Dan's heart that he's had all the time. I think he's always had that connection with the Valley. I read about those posts of other people, other students that became a part of the BSU, part of Dan's ministry there. It's been very impressive to me. It's just been verified in my heart, the kind of man and really the kind of husband and wife that he and Joanne are as individuals when they've kept in touch with people from the Valley. He goes back to do this kind of thing because his heart's in South Texas. And for someone who was born there, spent the first 20 years of my life there, I'm grateful that we have someone like Dan there, still going back to work with the folks there.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and to see the Lord work through Dr. Crawford, and then going back and listening to the testimonies of people like you and many others, it's been a pleasure in that regard. Dr. Crawford, again, you both go back to foundational early years of your personal ministry, specifically in the student ministry. Any memories, anything that you remember from those days from Brother Larry?
Well, you were talking about Maryland a while ago. I clearly remember Sunday afternoon, and Larry didn't know that all ministers take a nap on Sunday afternoon. I was taking a nap, and Larry and Marilyn showed up at our apartment to announce to Joanne and I that they had gotten engaged. And it was a great announcement and a lot of excitement. I was just kind of sleepy when all that happened, because he woke me up in the middle of my Sunday afternoon nap to tell me that.
He has, and Larry was not fully integrated into vocational ministry, that he didn't know the language of ministers on Sunday afternoons. It's one of the thou shalt nots. You cannot interrupt a minister's nap on that. Well, Brother Crawford, to speak of engagements, back then, marriages in ministry, now seeing Larry and Marilyn after all these years, definitely you play a major role on those foundational years. And Larry, I know before we began the recording, I found out that you grew up at First Baptist Edinburgh and Maryland at First Baptist Harlingen, which are both in South Texas. So, man, that is just exciting. And that is just exciting in that regard. Larry, let me close with this, brother. Here we are, several decades later. And
I do have one more story.
Go ahead. Of course. Yes, sir.
I got to tell you that in Larry's first year there, and my first year with Larry, we were going to take a retreat to Horsetail Falls near Monterrey, Mexico. And we chartered a Valley Transit bus and loaded it up, and off we went down towards Monterrey. When we got there, the bus driver parked the bus on the side of the hill, and the students were getting out and taking their luggage, and I was standing beside the bus, and all of a sudden the bus starts rolling back down the hill. And I'm envisioning the end of my collegiate ministry career, because they're all going away. But somebody jumped on the bus and stopped it. But I think Larry was on the bus that day as it started rolling back down the hill. So we nearly ended his ministry before it began.
That is true. All of that is, as I recall, Dan, it was not only back down the hill. I think it was going over a cliff if the man hadn't stopped it. So he jumped in there and put on the brake. And so, yes.
The word is providence.
Yes.
God's providence, mercy, and grace, that we are able to bring that experience with a very positive tone, and here we are again, decades later, and enjoying each other's company. And wow. Yes. But again, those things. Go ahead, Larry.
If I might say, I think it was the beginning for me in this pilgrimage, not only of ministry but of discipleship, personal discipleship, is that I saw in Dr. Crawford someone who was real. authentic. The Bible studies that students would lead, the class he would teach, things, the times of Vespers or whatever we had in the way of things through the Baptist Student Union. I'm just so grateful that God gave me people with whom I could be honest, and they had a sincerity about them that really marked their ministry. We've all come across people through the years, speakers, Bible teachers, that kind of have that steeple-throated voice and the language. And I'm just grateful. I saw in Dan, and this is from the sidelines, I know more things about Dr. Crawford than he probably knows that I know about him. But, his book, Prayer Shaped Disciples, since I've known about the opportunity to share on this podcast this morning, I've talked with a couple of our friends, and so they've told me about that book. I told them about the book. They've told me about how that book has shaped their lives. I took some quotes from them. Dan, I'll share with you another time about things they learned about prayer from that book. I just think it's been phenomenal the way that the Lord has used Dan through these years in his teaching career, Southwestern Seminary, emeritus now, and just and to think it all began in a fairly small school in South Texas, a little bit of an outer way place. You had to be going to South Texas to go there. You had to be there for a reason, and I'm grateful that God gave Dan and Joanne to Marilyn and me for those early years. I did want to share that too.
That's definitely important to remember, because as I recall, again, you and your wife, but specifically you and pastoral ministry, you have been retired now. And when I think about tenure and the many years that you have served, definitely prayer has played a major role on what the Lord has done through you and through your ministry. And again, just seeing the foundation coming from early years, even before you responded to the call, as the Lord utilized those years back in Pan American and eventually moving you into vocational ministry. So Larry, we are very grateful for your time. Thank you, brother, for joining the podcast. We're always blessed to hear how the Lord simply puts things together in his time according to his purposes. And even today, as we are the recipients, and I say we here in South Texas continue to be the recipients of the ministry of Dr. Crawford, it's definitely a blessing to have you. Dr. Crawford, any final thoughts before we close our time together?
I think I've said everything I need to say and heard more than I need to hear. Good to visit with Larry again.
I know Larry is a special friend to you, and I know you guys have a lot in common, and throughout the years you've kept that friendship, which also speaks volumes. So Larry, as we close our time, brother, as you know, we're recording this at the end of a school year, and the students are coming out of a graduation, some of them, and then transitioning. I'd love for you to close in prayer, if you don't mind, and I would. This is episode number 3 of Discipleship. This is a range of podcasts, and Dr. Crawford is going to have you this morning. Dr. Crawford, how are you?